Boker Tov, Choref Bari to everybody. Today's daf is Daf Lamed Aleph in Zbachim. Says the Gemara from the third line on the page. Itmar. Now let's understand. Let's have a little bit of a background. We learned the other day on Friday that the end of the Mishnah. Let's take the end of the Mishnah first. Is that if you had, well, let's take the whole thing. What is pigul? Pigul is when the pigul that you chayav kares is if you did any of the avodas with the machshava, that something that will be properly eaten will be eaten out of its time period, out of time, the next day or on two days later. Let's say you had a kavanah, you're going to eat it out of bounds, out of its perimeter, you're going to eat it in the wrong place, then it's pigul without kares. But eating means a kazayas. Let's say you had a kavanah, you're going to eat a half a kazayas or 3/4 of kazayas. That doesn't count. Okay, but we saw in the Mishnah, let's say I had a half a kazayas of chutz l'zman, out of time, and half a kazayas chutz makam, they are mitzdarif, but now you don't have the full chutz l'zman. You have a whole kazayas being eaten wrong, but it's only puzzle, it's not pigul, meaning it's pigul without kares. Okay, that's what we saw in the Mishnah. Then we had a discussion. What happens if you said it in a way, and Rav Yehuda in the Mishnah disagreed, and he said you go with whatever the first kavanah was. If the first kavanah was pigul, it's pigul. First kavanah was puzzle, like chutz l'makom, then it's only puzzle. You look at the first kavanah. The question was we raised yesterday's Gemara. The question is what happens if he said at the same time that he said pigul and he said chutz l'zman and chutz l'makom, he said it together in the same vein, meaning he said it like I want to eat. I'm doing this korban. I'm being makar of doing this avoda, right? With the intention that I'm going to eat a kazayas of chutz l'makom and chutz l'zman in one phrase. You said it in one phrase. There, maybe Rabbi Yehuda would be moda, and that's how it was mashma in the Gemara. The Gemara raised the question on Amid Beis, where he asked this question. He said, because he asked this question. He said, "Boy minei Levi from Rebbe. Let's say you had a kavanah lechol kazayis l'machar b'chutz in one phrase, meaning I'm going to eat a kazayis tomorrow and outside, both. What would you say there? There, Rabbi Yehuda l'charav demoted. It's not like you had a kavanah for first lizman and then for makom or vice versa. You said it. I'm going to have a kavanah for kazayis l'machar b'chutz, and the Gemara seemed to say, yes, the Rabbi Yehuda would be moda in that case, that it's one phrase and it's puzzle. And as it doesn't just go by the first thing that he mentioned, but the whole thing is said together. That's what's called iruv machshavos. It's a mixture of machshavos. Even Rabbi Yehuda would be moda. Now the Gemara is going to deal from the third line on Lamed Aleph with another question. Itmar chatzi zayis chutz l'zman, chatzi zayis chutz l'makom, v'chatzi zayis chutz l'makom. Let's say he said, once you say a full kazayis and you mention one idea, that's it. Right? If it was chutz l'makom, it's puzzle. Puzzle means pigul without kares, and pigul means pigul with kares. That's how we'll use it, pigul or puzzle. So let's say if he said chatzi zayis, chutz l'zman, chatzi zayis, chutz l'makom, okay, so you have a whole kazayis, but you don't have a kazayis and pigul, so it's puzzle. But let's say then he added on another chatzi zayis, chutz l'makom. He had 3 half kazaysim, a total of 1.5 kazaysim. The first 3 said chatzi zayis, chutz l'zman. Then he said chatzi zayis l'makom. Then he said chatzi l'makom. So Rava says the yakitz kiyoshna pigul. The pigul wakes up now. What does that mean? He said pigul originally, chatzi zayis. Then he said puzzle, chutz l'makom. And then he said chatzi l'zman. So can the third chatzi zayis combine with the first one? He says yes. The yakitz kiyoshna pigul. The pigul woke up now. Even though if he would have stopped at chatzi zayis, chutz l'zman, chatzi zayis l'makom, it would be puzzle. But if he added on chutz zayis, chutz l'zmano, so the 2 half kazaysim of chutz l'zmano combine, and now it's pigul. Rav Amnuna says no, ear of machshavos avi. It's still a mixture of machshavos over here. You don't have a clear pigul, and therefore it's only puzzle. Amarava. All right, so that's the question that we're raising here. In the Mishnah said, "Oh, chatzi zayis chutz l'zman, chatzi zayis l'makom, chatzi l'zman." Okay, you have a full kazayis now, but you don't have a full kazayis of pigul, so it's puzzle. Rabbi Yehuda said no, it goes with the first machshava. But what happens even according to the Tanakama if you added on another chatzi zayis and chutz l'zman after you said half a kazayis, chatzi zayis, chutz l'zman, then chatzi zayis, chutz l'zman again? The two chatzis zmanim add up together, combine, and it's piggled. Rav Hamnuna disagrees. He says, no, it's still a mixture, and you only have puzzle, you don't have piggle. How do I know this? Ditnan. He compares it to a case of tumah. Ditnan. Now, when it comes to tumah, we know what's the highest degree of tumah is a person, is a dead body. A dead body of let's say, a Jewish person is metame. That's called aviyavos tumah. Metzora is also like that. Aviyavos, the grandfather of all tumas. A person who touches a dead body is considered an avatuma. He has to go through the paraduma process, right? The mechatas process. That's an avatum. An avatum is also a dead carcass or a sheretz or something like that. A dead sheretz also is avatuma. That can make a rishon. If somebody touches that, something touches that, that's a rishon, or it's also called a vladatuma, because you have an av and then a vlad. And then you have, if that touches something else, it becomes a sheni. And if it's truma or kachim, it can become a third one. And if it's kachim, become a fourth one. Truma can become a fourth one. Kachim could even become a fourth one. And there's some sheets as the Rabbana that could even be a fifth one. So Rabbah says like this: How do I know this idea that they combined? It's not. Listen to this. Kebetza ocha rishon. Now, anything can become tamei, even a mashu. If I have a little piece of bread or something, it could become tamei, right? No problem. But in order to transfer the tumah to something else, it's got to be the size of a kebetza, the amount that a person could swallow in his throat at one shot, the size of an egg, maybe a small egg, but an egg. Okay, so it's got to be a kebetza. So let's say he says kebetza ochel rishon. Let's say you have a kebetza of food which is tamei in the first degree. That means after aviyavos, after av, then you have a rishon, also called a vlad, a tumah rishon. So you have kebetza which is tamei in the first degree. Ukebetza ochel sheni. Then you have another kebetza of food which is tamei in the second degree, because food can become tamei in the second degree. Shabbalah and Zebah said, now they got mixed up, they combined them. You took this food and you meshed it up and you made it into one big ball. Now, that's got a mixture of tumah rishon and tumah sheni. Okay, so he says, Shabbalah and Zebah said, rishon. It has a loch. If it touches something like rishon, why? Because you have a kebetza in this ball of tumah. You have this ball of food. You have a kebetza of ochel rishon mixed up in there. Okay, so kebetza ochel rishon, kebetza ochel sheni, shabbalah and zebah rishon. Cholek. Let's say you split it in half now. Now, when you split it in half, if it was a good mixture, you assume each half. What does that mean? You have two kebetzas now, but each betza is half rishon and half sheni. Cholkon zeh sheni v'zeh sheni. They only has a lach of a sheni. Why? Because you don't have a whole kebetza of rishon. And the rule is that if you have two things that are mixed up, rishon v'sheni, they add up, but to only make the tumah of the easiest one among them. In other words, if I have a kebetza of food which is half rishon and half sheni, that can only transfer tumah, make something a shlishi. It cannot. It has a halacha like a sheni. There's not enough there to make it into a rishon to be more machmer. So cholkan zeh sheni v'zeh sheni. Hachazer v'irvin. Oh, so he's like mashma that if I mix them up again, right? Let's say I took these two kebetzim, which are now each a mixture of rishon and sheni, and I combine them again. Chazer v'irvin. Rishon havitz mashma. It's a rishon because now I have again a total of two kebetza, two egg sizes, and I have a full rishon in there. So that's his proof. So you see that something could originally lose its status, right? It was originally each one was a rishon, one was a sheni, and the one was you had a rishon and a sheni. You mix them up together, right? You mix them up together. So in the mixture, I have two kebetzim, of which one kebetza is a rishon. That could be matame, make something into a sheni. But if I split them into two, then each one only has a lach like a sheni, because I don't have a full kebetza of rishon in each one. But if I mix them up in mashma, if I mix them up again, then it would be a rishon again, because now I have the two kebetzim together, and there's a full betza of rishon in this full mixture. So that's his proof. So you see, something could reawaken itself, like this case where he said you had a chatzis ayis chutzas man. And then you said you're doing this avoda with the machshav of chatzis ayis chutzas man and chatzis ayis chutzas makom, and then when you said chatzis ayis again, it can reawaken, it can combine again. So the Gemara mimai. How? So Rav Hamnuna asked mimai. I'm sorry. This is not Rav Hamnuna. This is Rava saying. How do we know that if we mix them up again, it would work? Midiktoni sefer says there. Nafal zeb atzmo v'zeb atzmo al kikar shel truma. Let's say you had each half. Remember, we said you took a kebetza of rishon, a kebetza of sheni, you mix them up together, then you split them. So each split now, each betza now has half rishon, half sheni. Now, if you took one of them this one kibetza, this split one, and it fell on a roll, let's say a lachmania of truma. Truma can become possible in the third degree, even a shlishi. You don't have that by chulin, by truma. Paslua. What it did was it only pasled it. Pasel, is a lashon of it's tameh, but it can't transfer the tumah. So the truma here would become a third degree. Why? Because it was each half is only as halacha like a sheni. Why? Because it's each peitzah now is half rishon, half sheni. So it can only transfer tumah like a sheni could. A sheni can make truma into a shlishi, meaning it's not really shlishi, it's puzzle, it's tummy in the third degree, but it can't transfer tumah to something else. It doesn't have that power. So if each one by itself, if each half, let's say each half, meaning each split, I call it, it's a full beitza, but it's half rishon, half sheni. If each touch the truma individually, it only makes it into a third degree. That means it's puzzle. Let's say they fell together. Let's say now these two halves, one beitza. Each beitza is half rishon, half sheni. If they fell together on the truma, it doesn't have to be together. Rashi says it could be either together or one, and then the other one fell on it while the first one was still there. That's also together, right? It would make it into a sheni. It would make the truma sheni. And why? Because now if they fell together, there's a whole beitza of rishon, right? Each beitza that was split was half rishon, half sheni. Now, if you put them together, you have a full beitza of rishon. So it would make the truma into a sheni, which could then make the it would make the truma. It would make the it would make the truma to sheni, which could then transfer truma to a shlishi. Could then that truma, if it touched something else, if it touched other truma, could make that into a shlishi, or if it touched kachim, it could passel that. So what do you see? That it could reawaken itself. You split these things into two, and then if you combine them again, you see that they have halacha like the original combination, where it's all rishon. For Rav Nuna will say that's no proof. Amar Hasami Kashir, a hacha like a shiur. There you started with a shiur. Originally, you had a full shiur, you had a full beitza of rishon and a full beitza of sheni, so you had a full one. Now, if it was split and recombined, so it's just returning to its original status, but it started out that way. Hasami Kashir, hacha like a shiur. But over here, in our case, there's never a shiur. You didn't have originally a kazayas when you're machshava. Again, we're comparing this idea of machshava chutz lazman and chutz makom to the concept of tumah. Can something reawaken? There you never had if you never had a full kazayas of pigel in which you split up and recombined. You started off with a half a kazayas of pigel, half a kazayas of puzzle, and then when you had another half a kazayas of pigel, it can't combine because it never started out that way. Here in the case of tumah, it started out that way. You had a full rishon originally. How do I know what I say? I say that if you had chatzi zayis chutz zman, chatzi zayis chutz makom, chatzi zayis chutz zman, it's still puzzle. It's not pigel. Food that became tummy with an avatuma. What does that mean? That means it's a rishon, right? Food that touched an avatuma, now it's a rishon or a vladatuma. B'shinitma b'vladatuma. And now, in other words, if you had food which became tummy, what does it mean here? Rashi explains that it means you had a half a kazayas that became tummy from an avatuma. So that half a kazayas is rishon. Remember, you don't need a full kibetza to become tummy. You can become tummy even a mashu. To transfer to me, you have to have a full kibetza. So a half a beitza touched a avatuma, so now that's a rishon. And another half beitza touched a vlad, that's a rishon. That means it became a sheni. Mitzvah from zemzel tamikal shabashneim. Now these two half beitzas combined. Now you have a full kibetza, but they can only be tame like the weaker one. The weaker one was the one that became tame via vlada tome. That means it's a sheni, so it can only be tame like a sheni. My love, even if you completed it and you added on more another half a kazayas of something which touched avatoma. Even if you completed its mashma, it still stays that way. So Gemara says, no, Dilma lo haramai. Maybe it's speaking where it didn't say that you completed it. In other words, you added another half kabetza afterwards of good stuff, a meaning of something which touched an avatama, which would be a rishon. It didn't say that. You're just assuming that. Okay. Kiyasar Abdim came from Eretz Yisrael Amar. He said, here's the halacha. Chatzi zayis chutz makom, v'chatzi zayis chutz zman, v'chatzi zayis chutz zman. Now the order is makom, chatzi zayis chutz makom, and then another half a kazayas of chutz l'zman, and then another kazayas l'zman. So the two l'chatzi l'zmans are together. Chatzi, the first half kazayas is chutz l'makom, pasul, and then you added, then you said chatzayas chutz l'zman, then you said chatzayas chutz l'zman again. Tani bar kapara, Rav Dimi said that bar kapara said that's pigul, right? Why? Ein chatzayas mog makom kazayas. The half kazayas that you started off with by saying chutz l'makom, that has no effect when you have a full kazayas. Here, lamaisa, you have a full kazayas. There's no this at this point. We're assuming, and this was the Gemara will seem that say that we'll bear that out later on. If you said, I have a kavana when I do the shechita that I'm going to do half a kazayas chutz l'zman. No, I'll have another kazayas chutz l'zman. I just said two kazayas chutz l'zman. They would add up. That's much from the Mishnah. So here he says also, even though I started up by saying chatzayas chutz l'makom, that has no effect because I followed up with two half kazasim of chutz l'zman, which combines the one kazayas. Kios Rav Rabin, when Rabin came from Eretz Yisrael, he reported it differently. Omer chatzayas chutz l'zman chatzayas. That doesn't work. He didn't agree with Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi says, Rav Dimi was talking about you started off with the chatzayas of chutz l'makom. So once you started off that way, you're already starting off badly. When you add the next chatzayas chutz l'zman, you've already made it possible. You can't fix it. So he says it only works this way. If you started off with chatzayas chutz l'zman, chatzayas chutz l'zmano, v'chatzayas l'zmakom. So again, you had three half kazasim like we've been discussing all day, but you started off with two half kazasim of chutz l'zman, of pigul. So Tani bar kapara pigul and chatzayas mogum makom kazayas. Once you have a full kazayas, because he said chatzayas chutz l'zman, chatzayas chutz l'zman, I got a full kazayas of chutz l'zman. Then the chatzayas of chutz l'makom has no effect. Rav Ashi Masni Achav says even a bigger chiddush. Chatzayas chutz l'zmano. I said chatzayas l'zmano, and then I said the kazayas, and then another kazayas, half of which chetzia chutz l'makom chatzayas l'zmano. Tani bar kapara there even says pigul ein chatzayas makom kazayas. This is a bigger chiddush. Rashi explains because here when he says he started off with chatzayas chutz l'zman, but then when he added on the other chatzayas chutz l'zman, he said and another kazayas, half of which is chutz l'makom, half kazayas. Even in a case like that, it still works. Because the chatzayas chutz l'makom doesn't help. Rav Yanai. Now again, where is pigul? Where you did any of the avodas, shechita kabbalah lachas rika. We'll talk later on if you did it with shvichas adam also afterwards. But basically, it's the four avodas with a machshava that something is going to be consumed properly, but it'll be proper except for its chutz l'zman. Let's say he says, Rav Yanai says, let's say I had a kavanah that it's going to be eaten chutz l'zman. That means chutz l'zman the next day on a regular carbon, not a shlum. Let's say he says it's pigul, but it's going to be eaten by dogs, not going to be eaten by humans. Is that considered eating? The dogs eat, of course they eat. He says it is considered eating. The Chsivit says Vesi Jezebel, right? Yochlu Aklabmi, the Navi said will be eaten by the dogs. Bechelik Israel. In the portion of Yisrael, Jezebel, her destiny will be that she's going to be eaten up by dogs. So she's going to be, she's going to be thrown in the street, so to speak, eaten up by the dogs. So you see the dogs eat. That's considered eating. Now, of course, they eat, but is it considered eating? What happens if you have a kavanah that the fire will consume it tomorrow? That's also eating. The siv tochlu eish lo nefach will be eaten by a fire that's not blown by man. So you see that's also considered eating. Hochanami the pigul. Maybe that's also pigul, and a kavanah that's going to be consumed by fire. If you tell me that is the case, but kanan lechol kazayas or lahakir kazayas kosher. The end of the Mishnah said if you had a kavanah, maybe you had a full kazayas, but it wasn't, it can't combine because the consummation of a person is eating. Consummation on the mizbeach is burning. But it's kosher. It doesn't combine for pigul. Even if you had a kavanah on both of them, chutz l'zman, remember, if you had a kavanah of less than a kazayas, it doesn't mean anything. But you had a kavanah of half kazayas going to be eaten, half kazayas going to be burnt on the mizbeach. That's kosher because achila she'ein achila v'aktar mitzvah, and that's what the end of the Mishnah said. So what do you see? That it consumed by fire is not the same as eating by man. It says no, ida afka b'loshen achila chanami. No, it would work if you said eating, just like you said, I have a kavanah that's going to be eaten by dogs or eaten by a fire. That would work because it's still eating. In our Mishnah, speaking about the afka b'loshen ketar, you said burning the loshen achila, the chud, the loshen haktar. Those don't combine. Consuming by eating and consuming by burning is not the same. But if you would have used the loshen of achila, the fire consumed, the fire ate. If you would say fire ate it, then it would work. But Rav Ashi is question. Let's say at a kavanah that it's going to be eaten. I'm doing this avoda shchita kabbalah or zrika with a kavana that'll be eaten. Kazayas will be eaten, but by two different people. By two different people. What would you say there? B'shnei Ramau. Plus, machshav look at the machshav, and machshav is the kashir. I have kazana that have kavana the kazayas will be eaten. Or do you look at the people eating it? And each person's all eating in half a kazayas. So does that count? But like a shiur, they don't have a shiur, and the person's not eating a kazayas. How can you count that? Amar by Tashma. Again, look at the last words of the Mishnah, the words we just quoted. Tashma lechol kachasi zayis or like kazayas kosher. If you had a kavana, you're going to eat a half a kazayas the next day, the wrong day, out of time, right? And burn half a kazayas. It's kosher. She'ein achila like tar mitzarfin. Achila and burning, eating and burning doesn't combine. Holechol v'lechol. Smashma eating and eating, that this guy, I have a kavana that I'm going to give Reuven to eat a half a kazayas, I'm going to give Shimon to eat a half a kazayas to the ad, dumi l'echel hakter, ve'echi dami hal b'shnei be'ar, eating and eating, something like echel hakter, because echel hakter means eaten by man and burned on the mizbeach, but if it would be eaten and eaten by two different people, Reuven and Shimon, mashma would be ve'echi dami b'shnei adam, mitzdarv, shma minod, echanami would be mitzdarv, because the key is he had a kavana that a full kazayas will be eaten by man, And from the fact that you say lechol chatzayis v'lakir chazayis, that doesn't work. Smash lechol would work. Boy, Rav, another question. Chishav lechol kazayis b'yeser mechtiach. Normally, we consider eating. It's got to be uchteach pras. What is that? And enough time you have to eat in order to make, let's say, to make a bracha achrona. You have to have a kazayis in k'teach pras, and there's the amount of time that it would take to eat a half a loaf. Pras means like a half a loaf of bread. That varies. Different portions say for somewhere between 4.5 and 9 minutes, whatever the shear is. But if you didn't eat in that time, it's not going to see it. If I ate a crumb now and you ate a crumb an hour later and a crumb an hour later, it doesn't add up. So let's say you had a kavana that you're going to eat a kazayas, but in longer than the time that it takes to normally eat a kazayas, right? A longer time. Is that considered mao? Do we compare it to eating of the mizbeach? And by the mizbeach, there's no rule about chatzi kazayas, about the shear of kedei achilas pras, and whatever it takes, it could burn for longer. We don't know. Mao lachilas gavoa. Do we compare it to achila gavoa? And therefore, achilas pras doesn't apply, right? And achilas gavoa is compared to, Rashi says, lachilas gavoa deis kishlinim machshava achilas gavoa achilas adam, because achilas gavoa and achilas adam are compared body adadi. Achilas gavoa af biosim achilas pras. So do we compare it to achilas gavoa, and therefore we're not concerned if you ate it in a period longer than a achilas pras? So if you had a kavana that you're going to eat the kazayas tomorrow, but you're going to eat it over a period of, let's say, 2 hours, you're going to spread it out. You're going to eat a crumb at a time. Would that be considered eating or not? Oh, achilas hetem. We compare it to achila of a regular person, which is the achilas pras. You got to eat it within, let's say, less than 10 minutes. Amar Abaye. So Abaye wants to bring a proof here again from the same words in the Mishnah. Amar Abaye tashma lechol kazayas alakir chatzayas. If you had a kavana, you're going to eat half a kazayas, and you're going to burn half a kazayas. It's kosher. Shein achila v'ktar mitzdarfim. They don't add up, right? They're two different things. Time with the lechol actor. Mash, the reason is because those are two different things. Eating and burning are two different things. Ho lechol v'lechol. It's mash with that you had kavana for eating and eating mitzdarf. Now, if you were eating it v'ha aktara bios mechios prasu. It's mashma that you had a kavana. Let's say you said you're not going to burn it, you're going to eat it. Okay, I said I'm going to eat half a kazayas, and I'm going to burn, and I'm going to eat, I'm going to consume, eat the half a kazayas by burning it. You didn't say the word burning. You just said la alecha v'lecha. It's mashma that what that you're going to eat one half normally, and eat another half, consume it by fire. It's mashma that it would be mitzvah because he used lashon v'chil like we saw in Aleph. V'aktara bios mechilas pras. And that's more than ilchas prasu, mashma that would be okay. In other words, it's only because you said achila, half a kazayas and half a kazayas aktara. But if you said eating it on both, right? If you said similar to that, dumi l'akter mitzdarf something himself. We said lechol katzis, lechol katzis. Ubein says yoser mikteis. Rashi says dumi l'aktara. In other words, it could even be that he doesn't mean lechol they consume, but it just means if I'm a kavanah that I'm going to eat, and I'm going to eat lechol like haktara, even if he didn't say I'm going to eat it by burning it, he just said I'm going to eat a half a kazayas and eat half a kazayas. And what do we mean by that? mitzdarf, v'aktar b'yoser, meaning like that. Rashi says, lechol v'lechol dumi l'aktar tzav, hechi dav yoser michayos pras, lechol chatzizayis, v'lachsa v'lechol, yoser michayos pras, lechol chatzizayis, v'lachsa v'lechol chatzizayis. Let's say he just said, he doesn't mean that he lechol. I had a kabana, and there's this mashma, achila and aktar are not mitzdarf. But let's say I said, I'm going to eat half a kazayas, and then I said, I'm going to eat another half a kazayas, right? Right? Mitzdarf, even though they weren't together, so I wasn't eating it in one eating, and so to speak, I'm going to eat half a kazayas at 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to eat another half a kazayas at 10 o'clock in the morning. It would be mitzdarf. B'aktara, in other words, like that, Rashi says again, Rashi, even where we are, between the two eatings is more than his pras. To meet Aktara, similar like Aktara, would be Mistar. There's no Dilma. Who says Bechlal that when it comes to being Makter, that it's more than Achilas Pras? Maybe if you had a big fire, think about it. If you eat a kazayas in 9 minutes, let's say, well, if I put it in a big fire, that would be consumed in 10 seconds, maybe. It's a big fire. So who says that? Who says that burning on the Mizbeach is more than Achilas Pras? So even though you said ein achila v'aktar mitzdarfim, eating and eating, dumya, again the girsa in the sheet that brings down is also dumya mitzdarf. And what does it mean dumya? That they're not together, like it's over a period of time. You're going to eat efekazayis at 9 o'clock tomorrow and eat efekazayis at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Similar to Aktara, where it's not limited by Achilas Pras. But who says maybe the Aktara is also Achilas Pras? Maybe you're talking about a big fire, so you can't prove anything from there. So that question of Lechol Achilas Pras, but yes, Achilas Pras, we weren't poshet. We were poshet the shaila of what? Of, let's say you said, his question was, if you're going to eat by 2 people, yeah, 2 people, that would be Achila, right? Because it's Dumya Lechol V'Hakter. Right, lechel v'lechel. I have a kavanah that Reuven's going to eat half a kazayis and Shimon's going to have kazayis. That would be good, right? That would be good. Only lechel v'lachter is no good. Mashma v'lechel v'lechel would be good. Here v'lechel v'lechel could be good, but you don't know that if you're comparing it to fire, you have no proof about achilas, if it had been achilas pras or not. Right. So then again, the Mishnah now said lechel kazayis says lachter kazayis kosher. So the Gemara wants to make a strange deal. Time with the lechel lachter. The reason that it's kosher is because those two things don't add up. So you don't have a half kazayas. If you would say, I'm going to have a kabbalah, I'm going to burn a kazayas tomorrow, right? That's it. That's pigul. But I'm going to eat a kazayas tomorrow. That's pigul. But if I had a kabbalah that a half a kazayas I'm going to eat and half a kazayas I'm going to burn, those don't add up. It's mashma that he had a kavanah. Okay, lechel hakter that I'm mitzdarf. But if I had a kavanah that I'm going to eat something and also I'm going to eat something normally, let's say, a half a kazayas, and I'm going to eat half a kazayas, something which is not normally eaten, mashma would be mitzdarf, because you're saying only achila and aktar not mitzdarf, but achila and achila would be mitzdarf, even if the second achila is a which is not normally eaten, like the emurim, which are normally burnt, not eaten. Haktani ratio, but how could that be? We learn in the ratio, lechel shadarko lechel. Right, it's only if your kavanah is you're going to consume it in the normal way. You're going to burn the emurim tomorrow, or you're going to eat the basar tomorrow. It's got to be in the normal way. So the diak, you're making a diak here, and you're saying, oh, lechol lahakter, that doesn't add up. But lechol, even if it's a davar she'ein darko lechol, would be mitzvah. But that goes against the Reisha, because the Reisha said, the Mishnah said, the same Mishnah, he said, it's got to be something which is done in the normal fashion. I'll tell you, I'll explain it. The end of the Mishnah, if you make that deduction, which is a strange deduction, because you're saying, that's no good, that doesn't add up, and therefore it's kosher, it's not pigul. But lechol, even if it's something which is something, if I had a kavanah, I'm going to eat something, half a kazayas, something which is normally eaten, and half a kazayas of a murim which is not normally eaten, that adds up. Goes like Rabbi Lezer. It's different. The reason it works is even if you hold of the diak, money goes like Rabbi Lezer. The Amar Machash Mechilas Mizbeach Mizbeach. Rabbi Lezer says you could mix that up. You could say if I had a machshava that I'm going to eat something which is normally burnt tomorrow, the next day, that's still pigul. Or if I'm going to burn something which is normally eaten, that's also pigul. That's Rabbi Lezer Shita. We had Rabbi Lezer Shita for the Tanan. We're going to have the Mishnah later on this week. but it's not. But we mentioned it before. The Tana shochet is a zebach. If you shech the carbon, lechol davar she'ein darko lechol, to eat some with a kavanah that you're going to eat something tomorrow, which is not normally eaten, like the emuru, or lach davar she'ein darko lachta, or I'm going to burn something which is not normally burned, kosher. That's not pigul. For a belezer posel, Rav says that's still pigul. When he says posel, it means it's pigul. That's still pigul because you can be machasher from one thing to the next, from achilus adam to achilus mizbeach and achilus mizbeach to achilus adam. Abayom or no, afilu tem rabbanan. You don't have to say it goes like a belezer, which is strange to say it goes like the belezer if his name is not mentioned. Normally we go like the rabbanan. Why do you make that diak? You said since the Mishnah says that lahakter doesn't add up. Nashma lechol does add up, even if it's davar she'ein darko lechol. What do you say? He says lotem. Don't say lechol davar she'ein darko lechol. Eleima lechol davar she'darko lechol. It just means this. I had a kavana. I had a half a kazayis that I'm going to eat something tomorrow, which is normally eaten, and I had another kavana that I'm going to eat half a kazayis right afterwards. I'm going to eat another kavana that I'm going to eat something which is normally eaten tomorrow. So what's the chiddush in that? My kamash malan. You're telling me the chiddush is davar shedarko lechol kamash malan mereisha shmam. We said that in the reisha. The reisha already said it has to be a kavana, something which is normally eaten. Kachatzi zayis bachutz. Kazayis is a puzzle. If you had it's puzzle. If you had half a kazayis and half a kazayis of one's chusas man chusas macher, a chasas lamacher, chasas macher, pigel. So that would certainly, we already saw that in the reisha. It doesn't mean the very reisha. It just means to say, because we're talking about two kavanas, half a kazayis and half a kazayis. The reisha means the earlier part, like it's towards the end of the Mishnah, but we already said lachol kazayis, b'chus chasas lamacher, or vice versa. That's puzzle. So we see already that idea that the two things add up. Ilechol lahakter. If you tell me that the kavanah was that you're going to eat half and consume half, mitukya the reisha shmamino. We already saw that. Now, what's the chiddush in that? If you're telling me that the end of the Mishnah is a big chiddush, lechol kazayis, lahakter kazayis, and what? That goof for that very same, that's the words that it's teaching you. In other words, not that it's teaching you if you consume, that if you have a half a kazayis of chutzas man, half a kazayis of chutzas makom, that those things add up for psul, and if they're half a kazayis for chutzas man, another half a kazayis for chutzas man, that would mashma that it would be pigul, because only if you said half a kazayis chutzas makom, half a kazayis chutzas man, or vice versa, that is possible. Mashma if you had two kavanas of pigul, chatzizayas, chutzazman, chatzizayas, that would be pigul. So there's no kiddush in that. So when you say over here, the end of the Mishnah says, lechol lahakter don't add up, and it's kosher, it's not puzzle at all. What are you teaching me? Or what are you teaching me? If you're telling me that it's going to be something which is darko lechol, we already saw that before, that the two things add up. If it's darko lechol, it's only because those things are not darko lechol. What? You can't add up the two things. Don't say that when it said chatzi zayis, lechon, chatzayis, lahakter. That's kosher. What is that teaching me? That if the two things which are normally eaten add up, we saw that from chatzayis, lamacher, chatzayis, bachutz, that those things are puzzle, and if it both be pigul, but if there be chatzayis, man, chatzayis, both be chatzayis, chutzlas man, that would be pigul. So it's not teaching me that. We already know that. If you're telling me the gufa, that itself, that lechol, lahakter don't add up, if you tell me that very same chiddush, what do I need that for? I could understand that from the deduction from the first part of the Mishnah. We took the reisha shmamina. The Mishnah said at the beginning, lechol davar shedarko lechol, right? Then it's pigul. That's mashma dafka davar shedarko lechol ein shein darko lechol lo. Now hashta omal lechol v'lechol davar shein darko lechol lo mitzarav. If I had a kavanah half a kazayis to eat something, half a kazayis something which is normally eaten, and half a kazayis which is not normally eaten, those things don't add up together. So lechol hakimi boy, certainly to eat a half a kazayis and to burn it, that certainly wouldn't add up, right? So what do I need this for? What do I need those words of chatzizayis lechol, chatzizayis lahakter doesn't add up, and it's kosher, it's not puzzle, it's not pigul. I could see that from the reisha of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says it's only pigul when you have a kavanah to something which is normally to eat something which is normally eaten. So mamadach something. If I had a kavanah that lechol, I'm going to have half a kazayis something which is eaten normally, and half a kazayis which is not eaten normally, that those things don't add up. Then I'm a starve. Lechol hakter would certainly be the case. Lechol certainly would be puzzle. Lechol me boy. The answer is no. Lechol hakter itzrich. That's still a big chiddush. Why? If I had a kavanah that I'm going to eat half a kazayis a food which is normally eaten, and I'm going to eat a half a kazayas of something which is not normally eaten, maybe that doesn't add up. But over here, when I say I'm going to eat half a kazayas of something which is normally eaten, and I'm going to burn something half a kazayas of something which is normally burnt, maybe those would add up because you're doing both things which are normal. That's the normal way it's done, right? Why? I think there, when the second half kazayas was to eat something which is not normally eaten. That's no good. That's why it doesn't add up. But over here, I swear, I do the shechita with a kavana, then I'm going to eat a half a kazayas tomorrow, and I'm going to burn a half a kazayas tomorrow. Those are both normal. It's normal to eat the kazayas of meat, and it's normal to burn the kazayas on the mizbeach. So they're both normal. That they don't add up. So therefore, it comes out that eating adds up. Even chatzizayis and los chutz and chatzizayis lamacher add up to make it puzzle. But if I have a kavanah, half a kazayis to eat and half a kazayis to burn, burning and eating don't add up. But eating and eating do add up as long as it's something which is normally eaten. That's the point we said on Amud Aleph. That if let's say it's good eaten by a dog or eaten by the fire, as long as I said eaten, and it's good that's no, as long as it's normal that way, that could work. So then it's okay. But the words achila and aktora, those don't add up, even though those are both normally the way they're normally done. A half a kazayas of meat is eaten, half a kazayas of emurim is burnt. But you can't add up eating and burning don't add up, and the lashon that makes it that the machshava to make it into pickle. Tomorrow Mitzvah will start the third parak. Have a good day, everybody. Moedim l'simcha, not moedim l'simcha, but Isru Chag Sameach. That we can say. Chag Sameach.